Hello and welcome back to the Outsider podcast. It's been a minute since we've uploaded an episode, but we're back with a great conversation today with Charlie Daly. Charlie is an author and sea kayaker that recently completed a trip to circumnavigate the coast of Ireland. We sat down with Charlie just 2 weeks after he completed this trip near his home in Bantry, and we talked at length about the trip. We talked about his preparation. We talked about a little bit of a deeper meaning as to why he took on this trip and how he got to the point where taking on this trip is even a possibility. It's a really interesting conversation, and Charlie's very open and honest about his relationship to the ocean, and it's something that as an outdoor enthusiast I can certainly relate to, and I hope that many of you can as well. If you enjoy these episodes, please feel free to share it with somebody that you think will also enjoy them. And you can share your favorite clips on social media and tag us at outsider.ie. Thanks very much, and without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with Charlie.
Anyway, thanks very much for joining me on the Outsider podcast. Thanks for being one of the inaugural guests.
Thanks for having me. I've liked what I've listened to so far, and it got me thinking about questions already.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks very much. Well, we are here to talk about your paddle around Ireland, but before we dive into that, there's a question that I sort of pose to every guest at the start of the podcast to get to know you a little bit better and to share the background of your story a little bit. So the first question I always ask is, what does being an outsider mean to you?
Yeah, this is the one I've thought about the most. I love that question, and I really like the way Jam and Ellie have answered it on your previous episodes. To me, it's a question of where are you most you, and if that's up on a hillside or out in the ocean or along a coastline, you might be an outsider. You know, that's how I think of, because it's a word I would definitely apply to myself. One of the interesting things about this trip is while you're spending your days out on the water or under sea cliffs and things like that, and in tide races in really wild environments, you're coming back to usually pretty close to civilization, and you're in a lot of contact with people for whom what you're doing is way outsider behavior. For sure. And that's always interesting. But I think that's it. You know, it's like, do you have that? And I've heard you speak about this on previous podcasts, that energy that you either use or it uses you, which I wrote that down. I love that. Because I've been on both sides of that equation. And I think if just going for a basic 5K around the block or just a kind of maintenance level of exercise doesn't quite do it for you, or if you kind of want to see what's over the next hill or what's around the next headland.
Metaphorically or in reality, like actually wanting to see what's around the next headland.
Totally. And I think with a lot of these sports, certainly with kayaking, there's a way you can do it that's like pure athleticism. That's just going to be about electrolytes and heart rate zones and blisters. And it's not really going to, you can do it on a comfortable inland body of water. Not to disparage any place other than Ireland, but one thing I said to a friend of mine while I was doing this trip is if the whole thing was like the calmest sections of this trip, I wouldn't be a kayaker. Like what I like about it are, we have Bantry Bay behind us, which opens to the Atlantic. The really exposed stuff is what makes kayaking in Ireland so unique. Anyway, that's such a long answer.
No, I love it. I do want to go like really deep on everything to do with paddling around Ireland, because it's something as a challenge that was introduced to me just while I was out on a kayak with somebody that I knew down in Kerry maybe a year or so ago, and I never really thought about it as a thing beforehand. So I'm really keen to go into to really deep dive into the training, the preparation, and then the execution and what you're thinking now that you're back on land. But to set it up a little bit, bring us back to young Charlie. What was his relationship with the outdoors? Did he have any relationship with the outdoors? Were you in an outdoorsy family? When did you sort of realize that expressing yourself physically in the outdoors was a path for you? And what does that introduction look like? And maybe chronicle us up to when you first got the idea of maybe I should paddle around Ireland.
Yeah, it's another great question, and I had an outdoorsy family, but not in a really conventional sense. But I think the simplest answer, all of this, my interest in the outdoors started with my parents needing to like get me out of the house because I was like climbing things and driving them nuts. I was diagnosed with very severe ADHD as a young kid and really struggled in school, and nothing kind of worked. And but at the same time, I grew up spending my summers here on Bantry Bay. My family had a cottage right on the shore, and that was my first experience of the way the outdoors. It's almost like a drug, where it's like where it's like, oh, this is what normal is supposed to feel like. And for a lot of us with ADHD, if you do have experiences with drugs and alcohol, it's like you get that the normal switch has been flipped. I didn't have sitting still issues when I was in a place that actually required me to be in motion and be alert. And so at a young age, I was really interested in being outside, and my parents really encouraged it because it was kind of the only thing that worked.
Or mellowed you out, or, yeah.
Totally, and I was like impossible when I was at home, and I'm still kind of that way. But on top of that, my mom ran the Boston Marathon. She was always training for that, running. And my dad is a Marine and a combat veteran and medically retired U.S. Marine. He was shot. He had me really late in life. He's a Korean War veteran. In history class and stuff in school, when I'd say, oh, my dad was in the Korean War, they'd be like, I think maybe you mean Vietnam. And I was like, no, Korea, and my grandfather was in World War I. So I grew up with that kind of legend of, like, he's literally a war hero. And I remember the first time me and my brother got a tent to go camp in the backyard, I remember I asked my dad if he wanted to, like, join us or, like, come, like, hang out in our tent. And he was like, no, I used to do it professionally. And he had a lot of stuff he was dealing with that he never spoke about. And one of the ways he kind of dealt with it, which was like winning the lottery for me, was messing around in small boats. And we always had and I grew up between here and then Cape Cod in Massachusetts, which is another perfect little piece of the Atlantic. And we used to do these pretty gnarly little epics in a small open like skiff. We would go to islands off the coast of Massachusetts as a day trip, or we'd go here to the end of Bantry Bay.
Yeah.
And those are my best memories of spending time with him. And it was also when I learned how to use a compass and how to plan a passage along a coastline, how to read the difference between a wave that's really dangerous and a wave that's just kind of going to make you wobble a little bit.
Yeah.
That's where it all started. And I just, I was in and out of kayaking as a sport for a long time, but it was always kind of in the background. I did other things. I surfed, did a lot of body surfing. And I heard about this trip when I was like probably 10 years old. I read one of the first books that was ever written about it. By total coincidence, somebody had left it at our summer house. It's called On Celtic Tides by a guy named Chris Duff, who's an American who did this trip. So I knew this trip existed. When I moved back to Ireland after COVID and started kayaking a lot more, I started like training with people who had done this trip. And so it went from, and it was really almost like a peer pressure there, where it went from...
It went from being like a really niche thing to like, oh, this is maybe I could do this.
Maybe I could do this.
Yeah.
And I got the kind of boat that I think was the right one for the way I wanted to do this trip. And I got to know people who started asking me, like, when are you going? Instead of like, do you want to do this? And I think, and then it just, I didn't look back. And that was where I learned about things like heart rate zones. I used to just go for a run just to like burn energy. And I would just go nuts. And then I got a heart rate monitor. I learned that you actually want to, like you were saying, is you're building a diesel engine and you're slowing down. That said, I don't think any amount of training could have prepared me for my first attempt. But I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, let's get into it. Like this most recently, like you're only back on land a month maybe since you're
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So since you're successful, circumference, is that what you would call it?
So it's circumnavigation, and I want to be really clear about some things. There's a big asterisk next to mine, and that's going to drive me crazy till I do it again. So I basically this time around finished the trip I started in 2023, and I'll tell you all about that trip. But I pulled out of that one with a pretty severe injury, and I came back. I started where I'd finished on one side of the island, finished on the other. And so I didn't get all the way around this summer. My total elapsed time is still 700 days, which makes me one of the slower ones to do it. But look, everybody does this trip their own way. There are people. This guy Kevin O'Sullivan wrote a great book about this trip. He's an Aer Lingus pilot. He was doing it on his days off over the course of like 3 years.
Yeah.
People have done it in stages. People have done it. The record is 23 days.
Yeah.
A guy named Mick O'Mara, who you folks have written about.
Yeah.
And the weather's never going to give you the same trip each time. But
everyone has their own sort of unique approach and then unique experience. And there's only so much, like you could go into it with the best intentions of this is what I want my trip to be like and best laid plans and all that. And then it just not end up playing ball at all.
Yeah, Mother Ocean, the North Atlantic, has all sorts of tricks up her sleeve for people's best laid plans.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Whatever you think you're gonna do.
But we were talking a little bit just as we were walking down to this lovely spot. We were talking a little bit about this, like adventure almost being a creative pursuit, and like I'm just reminded of it there as you're talking about the Aer Lingus pilot who was doing it on his days off. Like you hear similar things about people doing the Camino, for example. They go back year on year on year and do anything from 30 to 300 kilometers in a summer, and it maybe takes them 2 to 10 summers to do the entire trip. And that's just them setting up the trip in a way that they want to. So what was it going on in the back of your mind in terms of how you wanted to set up this trip? And now you've already said there's reason for you to want to go back, to maybe go faster or to go as one uninterrupted loop. Talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the supported versus unsupported nature of your trip.
Sure. Well, I set out to do this with, first of all, one thing to be really clear about. This is unsupported in the sense that there's no van following me around. There's no boat following me around. I'm responsible for my own safety, etc. That said, I don't think anyone does anything unsupported. You know, there are going to be people at home. You consult about weather. There are people sending you resupplies, etc. You get the occasional night at somebody's house, which is always nice.
Yeah.
So my best laid plan in 2023 was to do this as fast as possible. I started with a friend of mine who was completing a section that he hadn't done to date. He had done a lot of other sections of the coast. We got from here in Bantry to Doonbeg in about 5 days, which is on the other side of Loop Head. That's pretty fast. And there's people doing bigger days than that, but that's on the. I mean, everything about this trip is outside of the realm of normal sea kayaking. But we got weathered in, and we had to start making some decisions. He had to go back to work. His idea of vacation days wasn't sitting inside a tent, and I don't fault him for that at all. He gave me a call when he got home, and he's like, "Look, man, those winds might not start blowing till October. So why don't you start looking at other ways to take on different parts of the coast and see if the weather improves?" Turns out that was exactly right. If anyone remembers 2023, we didn't get a summer. One person finished that year. It took him all summer. And so I got a ride home, and I started again in Skull, going the other way. And I got as far as Dungarvan, and I pulled out. Now, on day one, lifting the boats, and this is, I read an article recently that I forget where it was, but they're saying an adventure versus an activity is like an adventure. You don't know how it's going to go. If you know exactly the outcome, then it's just an activity. day one, lifting the boats, not following just basic health and safety or manual handling, tore a big hernia on like both sides, just basically ripped my guts open. By day 3 of the trip, after we'd crossed Dingle Bay, it was a really long day, it was pretty clear there was something going on there. And I asked Dr. Google, and sure enough, I had, big bulging. I'm sorry if anyone eating while they listen to this, but I had like basically my intestines sort of sticking out through the muscle of my abdomen. And I obviously Googled until I found what I wanted to hear, which is that you can like massage it back into place. So I'm laying in my tent, like putting my guts back in. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't feel great, but it doesn't feel awful, so I'll keep going. We get to crossing the Shannon. We're out in the middle of the Shannon. Hernia pops out. I'm not really able to rotate the way I need to paddle, so I lean back, I pop my spray deck, and kind of lean back on the back deck of my kayak, trying not to go over, massage it back in real quick while my buddy wasn't looking. We get to Loop Head. I tell him about it. I'm like, look, man, I'm pretty sure I have a hernia. I'm pretty sure that's pretty serious. And the next section is from Kilbaha to Doonbeg, which is near Kilkee on the other side. There's nowhere to stop in between, so you're doing, I forget what that is. I forget if is it 20 nautical miles, something like that. You're basically doing 40K where you cannot get off the water. And he's like, right, man. Well, and this guy, David's his name. He's a genius of motivation. He's like, look, if you don't think you can do it, we're not going to do it because we got a big section coming up. So I'm like, all right. I pull ahead of him for the first time in the whole trip. I'm like, that's not going to sit well with me. Then we get our weather delay. I get going on the other side. Long story short, eventually it gets to where I can't sit up. I can't keep paddling. And when something like that happens to you, at some point, it becomes really irresponsible because you could be involving a lifeboat crew who has to come rescue you. I could be putting my family into a position that, they didn't ask to be put in when they've already put up with so much risk. So it was really clear this was over. And then, I got the surgery I needed to patch that up. I got to training again immediately, and that was very humbling because a lot of things that were easy before took a long time to come back. And then we found out that my wife and I were expecting our first child due in July. Right? Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting, but
puts a timer on things.
Yes, and so this, by the way, I'm skipping 2024. There was some family emergency health stuff. There was some really, really good news at work to where I just couldn't go anywhere. I had a book to finish, and so I keep training, and it was great because I realized how not ready I was in 2023. I had the attitude. I was chomping at the bit to go do this, but again, Mother Ocean will tell you if you can do it or not. So 2025 comes around. Okay, baby due right in the middle of paddling season, so this isn't really going to happen. And a lot of the stars start lining up work-wise. It looks like beginning April, I'm going to have kind of a window. And I start thinking of, okay, if I'm going to get this done maybe in sections, could I get a ride up to Belfast and do the East Coast? Because that's a little bit more settled weather-wise, whatever. Then we got that amazing high-pressure system that came through in April around Easter and didn't go away. So I got to start up in Doonbeg. Day 1, just a short little hop to Milltown Malbay. It was stormy. And then continued on to the Aran Islands. By day 3, I was up in Streamstown on the other side of Connemara. It took me 6 days to get to Sligo. Wow. So then I'm like, okay, this is happening now. And the short version is I just kept going, and I didn't have very many weather delays. I didn't have any days off the water after Malin Head because, as you know, we've had this incredible spring.
I'd say you have some absolutely incredible memories from that. Because even just being up the hills during that spell of weather, and whenever you get weather like that in Ireland, you really cherish it. It means a whole lot more. I remember a couple of summers ago, we got a really nice heat wave, and my friend and I were out for a run through a forest that we run through in all weather, like February, like this river is iced over, like there's no comfort involved in the run in the middle of February. And then in July or whatever, when this heat wave comes, being able to jump into that river to cool yourself off after a run, it's way nicer because you have the contrast of what it's like in February, and because you know what Bantry Bay or other similar areas can be like in the winter whenever you're looking out your window. That contrast makes the good weather, you appreciate it so much more, and especially when it's lined up almost perfectly with 2023 not going well, 2024 other things going on, 2025 I've got this deadline, and then the weather is just perfect beforehand.
That's it. Yes, and to give you an idea of how fleeting it can be, and also again the humbling nature of like I didn't get to decide which trip I got to do. If I had kept going instead of just finishing what I started in 2023, if I had given myself an extra probably 2 weeks to get around all the way to the Loop Head, let's just get it done in one season. At that point, it would have been probably 50 days or something. It wouldn't have happened. I'd be here now because the weather has since gone back to being nasty, and I'd be stuck in Kerry 2 days from the finish line with no clear window to finish, and I'd be out of time. So, and no, it's so true. And I think when you add the element of the sea and the changeability of the weather here, it can be very frightening. I compare it to like, have you ever seen a person just flip from like furious to calm and happy?
Yeah.
And it's almost unsettling that they could turn on a dime. It's nearly like, when are you going to blow your top again, right? And some of the headlands and stuff are that way, where it's like, okay, well, it's nice now, but I saw what it was like yesterday.
Yeah.
And how long is it going to let me?
Yeah.
Like, how is this window? Because some of these weather windows will slam shut. In like my window to cross Donegal Bay was I think 12 hours. But it was an 8-hour crossing.
Yeah.
So it's like that's going to be, you might even be finishing in really bad weather.
Yeah. And I imagine quite a lot of the trip, like there's obviously a humongous amount of planning that we probably just don't have time to talk about the complexity, but I think everyone can appreciate the complexity of putting together a trip like this. But even just in the day-to-day, being able to make decisions about pacing yourself, and like what you said, I've got 12 hours to do this 10-hour paddle, or it's 8 hours, but you've got a period of time where, and sometimes you would have not embarked on that weather window, you wouldn't have, and then like making that judgment call gets a bit tricky, because you're like, I could not take this little bit of risk and then get no reward and have to spend 2 days here, and then I'm way far behind my plan. Or I can roll the dice, do my best. It might not go my way, but I will get across, and it won't be enjoyable, but I'll get across. And then when it's calm in 2 days' time, I'll be 50k down the coast, and it won't actually bother me as much. And I imagine there's many times that sort of plays into it.
That is exactly how it works. You get it. Like that's no, and it's funny too. I'm thinking about your day where you're leaping into the stream, and it might have rained that afternoon, right? Maybe your weather window to do that was like
exactly
10 minutes.
It's less consequential, I suppose, than when you're paddling around Ireland. But.
Sure. No, but that strategy is exactly right. I've heard people describe it as like chess moves, where maybe I'm going to have a tough couple more hours to get around this next feature. And eventually, because you're dealing with an island, entire land masses become that way, right? Eventually, when you get over Malin Head and you're a little bit into the north, you can forget about the Atlantic. It doesn't have anything to do with your planning anymore. And same with the tides. The Irish Sea stop being an issue after you're no longer in them and you're onto the Atlantic coast. That's all you're doing. It's just endless decision making around those factors. The other thing is you think about your own comfort and what kind of a trip you want to have. If I know I'm going to get stuck for a week, I want to get stuck somewhere where there's like people and a pub. And
Yeah.
my best weather delay was in a place called Mahararty, up in Donegal. It's just before Hornhead, which is kind of the next thing before Mallinhead. And it's all I could think about. I was obsessing, and at this point I was injured. I had a tendon thing, so my days were getting shorter anyway. And all I could think about was getting over Mallinhead, because even though I was nearly more than 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks into the trip at that point, the viability of the trip kind of hinged on whether I got around Malin.
Yeah.
And a buddy of mine, I was going to sleep in a parking lot, and a parking lot with a lot of rat traps around, which should tell you something always. And that's a whole other factor. But my friend was like, oh, I have a friend in Mahararty. I'll see if he's around. And 5 minutes later, this guy rocks up and he's like, do you want a meal? Do you want a bed? Yeah. I go and stay with his family. Now they're in the Gaeltacht. Irish is his first language. They speak Irish at home. I've never experienced that in a lifetime of visiting here. And he takes me to a session and of traditional Irish music. I mean, I could have cared less that I wasn't paddling the next day because it was too windy. I could have cared less that all my obsessions about Malin went out the window for the evening, and I got to just chill.
Yeah, that's amazing though. And that literally does play into something that I had written down on my little cheat sheet here about this idea of contrast and this idea of, like, you could be out braving it, like you've got a sore tendon in your arm, you are fully in your mind of like, this is all that matters to me. And as sort of dramatic as that sounds, that can especially in the magnitude of paddling around the entire coastline of Ireland, like that's going to be a mindset that you flip into from time to time. And then pulling your boat ashore and going to a pub and having a trad session or having a pint of Guinness or having a chat with a local person or whatever, like that contrast, like, did you ever find that challenging? Like, did you ever, one thing I have experienced in the past is I used to do quite a lot of rock climbing in the Alps, and I'd be away for a week or 10 days this was before data roaming was really even a thing as well, and these mountain refuges in the Alps would not have Wi-Fi, so you'd arrive back and your phone would be ding, 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 dinging, and you'd like spend 30 minutes scrolling through all the new messages and all this sort of stuff. And though, even as a younger person then, there was a feeling of like getting messages from friends about things, and I just think I would think to myself, oh, you don't get it. Like, I just had this like epic experience where I was like hanging off this cliff and I like sent this 6B in the middle of like this multi-pitch route in the Alps, and you just don't get it. And I'd say I'm a little bit more mature about like my approach to these things now, but is there a flavor of that you relate to? Is there a flavor of that you relate to?
Big time. I mentioned the post-expedition blues. It is exactly what you're describing. Because if you think about it, right, your life was probably, for those days and weeks, was probably very simple, right? You have your refuge, you have your meal that's probably a nutritious and salty and awesome. And you have climbing and if you kind of don't die, you're good, and then if you climb the way you want to climb, that's even better. But you're not having to. And I think if you've read like Joe Simpson, the Touching the Void, he talks about this, how like the risks when you're on a wall are finite. When you're out at sea, it's the same thing, right? And it's manageable to an extent. And the stuff you can't manage is you are sort of forced to contend with. It's not a big, like, existential question. But things like bills and stuff kind of never go away, and obligations, and it's really easy. Like I was saying, my main point of contact, I called some friends during the trip, mainly just tried to balance how much battery was in my phone and like how much contact Dominique and I needed to like stay married. And because she'd already put up with so much for like indulging this trip while she's very pregnant, and you know, I said to her one day, I was like, if I did this trip long enough, I would like forget what my family looked like, because it's just nothing.
There's something you said at the outset that it like time outdoors can be a bit of a drug, and it's a great elixir for certain problems, but it's also like some of the words that you're using are very associated with other kinds of addictions.
I was going to say, any like heroin addicts listening to this are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. And yeah, and again, listen, I mean, if you, and maybe that's, I'm not trying to come from a position of, like, that should tell you how I relate to that phenomenon. Like, I'm very conflicted about that, and I think it's very, in some ways, very selfish. The one thing I'll say is there's something about having adventures that you can give back to the people in your life that someone who's a drug addict doesn't have.
Yeah, like one of the aspects to your trip that is important to note is that you did do it to raise funds, or in part to raise funds for Parkinson's disease. Maybe talk a little bit about if there's any connection to that cause in particular, and then a little bit maybe more deeply as to why you associated yourself with any charity for a trip like this.
Sure. And I guess real quick though, is to one other thing about, like, I guess the upside or the benefits of this. I think that there is something about who you are as a result. I mean, for you, I'm sure that those climbing trips gave you something to give your friends that would more than make up for what you're missing when you're not in those chats on your phone.
Yeah, you become maybe a little bit more, like, once you're through the sort of, oh my God, you don't get it sort of chapter, then you get a lot better at compartmentalizing, this is my adventure me and this is my at home me. And then whenever you can be fully in on adventure, and you can be fully in on, I'm at home, I'm with my girlfriend, I'm walking the dogs in the morning, we're having conversation about our lives. Like, you get a lot better at that. So
and I wanted to linger on that for a second, because I don't want anyone for a minute to think that it's like I have this just addictive relationship with the outdoors. That and I think in the sense that, you know, again, if you go to the example of someone who's like a junkie or something, they'd probably put it the same way, right? That they have a hard time explaining to their family why this substance means more to them than their family does.
Yeah.
But their family doesn't get anything out of that. It's all take, right? Whereas in this case, like, I'm going to have conversations with my child about this trip, or about life, maybe about what they're going through that I learned out there.
Well, there's like this. You know? I know. I asked a question and then we went back, and we're gonna. But this is just the way that it's gonna go.
No.
I had this thought just this morning. I went for a bit of a run, knowing that we were meeting up for this chat, and I just thought, how cool is it that you can go to like any beach in the country for a beach day in like 5 to 10 years time, when your kids like building sandcastles and all that sort of crack, and you can tell a story about what it was like paddling by that beach. Like, every single beach you go to, you're like, because Charlie was there at some point. Like, I just find that so cool. It's similar to the conversation I had with Ellie Berry on the previous episode about, like, every hill that we look at that's over a certain, so maybe not these hills, but any sort of significant hill that you drive by or walk up. Now I'm sort of like, oh, Ellie's been up this hill. And it's similar with your sort of story. So yeah, you definitely can tie into relationships and conversations with family.
I mean, I think about that a lot. There's a weird, you get a real sense of satisfaction from that. I remember thinking that between attempts, flying in and out of Ireland, and being like, one day I'm going to look out the window of the plane and know that coastline intimately. We were headed to the States one time, and it was that 3 across, those narrower Aer Lingus jets that they have now. And there was an older woman sitting next to us, and I was pointing out some areas in Kerry that you could see from taking off from Shannon, way in the distance. You could see kind of basically what the Shannon crossing would look like. And I pointed out this area where David and I had to basically ride out a squall that descended on us, but when we couldn't land anywhere near Brandon. And I think the woman next to us thought that I didn't know where the Cliffs of Moher were or something. And she's like, "Is this your first time in Ireland?" and so, yeah, there's an immense satisfaction to that. And I think, too, you know, I'm about to be a father. This kid is going to have experiences that are going to seem totally impossible, or they're going to be wondering how to take kind of one more step in whatever metaphoric like sense, and I'll have something I can offer based on days out there when it was like that for me. And growing up, I had that from my dad about, you know, experiences he went through that I wasn't there for, but that made an impression in my life. So you asked about the charity side of it. Yeah. So,
although I think that was a brilliant, that was an important context to the previous bit of the conversation.
Yeah, because again, I think that question, I think it's completely valid to raise the selfishness question, and I know people do, and I almost try to get ahead of it.
But the selfishness angle does sort of weave into this charity sort of side of it.
Yeah, this, you know, I learned a lot about everything on this second attempt that I kind of would have done differently the first time. But both times, so my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I think 5 years ago now. And she's doing really good. She's in a stable early stage that you can stay in for a long time. And she's in great health. And so it was kind of a no-brainer that if I was going to have a charity element to this, I wanted to do the Michael J. Fox Foundation. They're focused purely on research. They're trying to cure Parkinson's. And so I got started with that. And it's really funny because I was tempted a lot of times in the way I talked about that to really make it sound like this is like for Parkinson's, and there'd be confusion where, like I was on the radio in Waterford as soon as I finished the trip. I had an interview like 3 minutes after I landed, and it was like I think the way I think the question was framed as if that came first, and then I found this challenge to go do. And that's not really right, because if I'm honest, the reason I want to do this is because I want to do this, because it's there, because it's... And when I started weirdly downplaying the charity side of it made people more charitable. I think because I wasn't trying to make it sound like I was more altruistic or whatever than I am. And I was like, oh, and by the way, we're raising a bit of money. But the one thing I wasn't expecting is how much help you get from just random people when you have a charity component to what you're doing. And so just for that reason alone, I would say anybody who's doing like an outdoor endurance activity, find a charity to connect yourself with. You're going to be doing something to make it a little bit less selfish, a little bit less of like the Charlie show or whatever. But at the same time, I had people paying for meals. I had people giving me places to stay. And that's, something else that makes this trip special is this is a very friendly coastline.
Yeah. Do you feel as though your relationship to the country of Ireland has changed at all? Or there's a couple of different ways I could tackle this question. One thing that popped into my head there is you were talking about the Atlantic earlier, and it's almost as if you're talking about this as a being, as something that you're interacting with on a daily basis when you're on the Atlantic coastline. But I suppose more broadly, has your relationship changed to the country of country of Ireland? And I mean that in the physical landscape as well as the people and the nationality and all that sort of thing as well. And then whenever you were touching on sitting next to the lady, and because you sound like an American, she just assumed that you didn't know where the Cliffs of Moher were or whatever. Have you had any change to your own personal identity and the way that you feel as somebody that lives in Ireland Those are two quite big questions.
I love it. No, totally. Yeah, look, and it's really funny because I know one thing that comes up, and people ask this all the time. Some people think they shouldn't ask this, but is like, what's next, right? And
that's on my list.
I hate, right? Yeah, no, as it should be. But I hate to say it, but like my ambitions as a paddler don't extend very far beyond this island, and it's because of this place and what it means to me, what it means to my family. Probably a little bit of the insecurity of knowing that no one's ever going to assume I'm Irish just because of my accent, and because it's really funny. I got tired of answering like how did you get your boat over here and things like that when in reality I literally left from my front door and no, there's a deep connection, and I'd say it is a being, I mean, you think about it. I mean, this is probably going to be a very offensive take, or maybe a little grandiose, but once upon a time, the people here worshipped like the sea and the land, and I don't know how anyone would ever get away from that and think that you need to impose something else extra on top of it. I think that there isn't like this was a spiritual experience. You don't need to interpret it through any kind of lens beyond that. And in that way, I would say that this was a connection with a coastline that's very much alive, and these rocks were here a long time before I was, before any people were. They're going to be here long after, but it changes too. The headlands are all becoming islands because of the way that the rocks break them down over the centuries. Every place has history. I think there is something about Ireland that is, and maybe I sound very American romanticizing it like this, but the fact is, like, there's the sea is incredibly important to this place and the people who live here. No,
I mean, Irish folklore, you don't have to go far to, like, it's all about people's connection to nature. Like, there's something really ingrained in the culture around, and some people maybe have a connection to it and some people maybe don't, or are aware of it or not. But I feel like it's something maybe you feel or you're aware of if you've grown up here, or you're connected with Ireland in some way, that there is a connection to the land, to the sea, and it would be hard not to with the weather that we get sometimes, to like in some way connect, in some way feel some kind of connection to that.
Totally. And one thing early on in my planning for the trip, a mentor of mine suggested that I really learn the place names, besides that being a safety factor, because you need to very quickly be able to identify where you are. I mean, even right now, I'm looking at the different headlands, even without a map, trying to figure out how far away we are. So if I had to call a mayday, I'll do it right now. I don't need to figure out. You have no business being lost. And but by really learning the place names and some of the history, you connect yourself in a different way to your surroundings. No, that it's profound. And the thing is, you're spending all day long in my case, silence. I didn't do music or podcasts or anything, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. And you can't help but end up just in a rhythm where the sea is dictating what you're doing and when you wake up and how the day goes. And you're kind of in a primitive place, probably like the people who made up those, or told those folk legends and things, because you're hoping, you're just like they were, hoping that you can get across that bay before the wind picks up, or that those clouds aren't bringing something really menacing. And yeah, I don't know. And then, you know, I when I'm out there, I've written about this and I've mentioned it before, but, you know, on my mom's side, they're Irish, but my dad's was born here. My mom came over, or their family came over a long time ago. I just think of how frightened they must have been on like wooden ships, because I find it scary.
Yeah.
Doing a sport with a lot of training, all this stuff. You're just your life as an adventurer, as an outdoor person, is you're just constantly learning from experience, and hopefully not disastrous experience, but you're learning kind of where those limits are and your margins are always going to change. And I think you get the most done on the margins. So the question is, where is that?
Yeah. You know? Just that extra degree, to use, I suppose, a seafaring term, outside of that comfort zone, or outside of that, cruising along, happy enough, but making that decision to do a crossing that's going to take you 8 hours when your weather window is 12 hours, like making that decision, that I suppose is where the biggest rewards are, both in terms of making progress on a trip, but also probably adding colour or adding something to the experience of doing the trip for you as well.
Totally. And it's immensely rewarding. And I'd say this to anyone who's kind of, especially someone in that kind of beginner to intermediate phase of their life as a whether it's a sea kayaker or any kind of outdoor person, there's real satisfaction in doing things that would have just freaked you out a year ago or back when you were learning. And where I really saw this in my training and preparation was my mom's reaction to it, because she was, and this time around, she was following and watching the Garmin tracker and really wasn't. I could just tell she wasn't worried like she has been on past trips, and that was really interesting to see. And it kind of showed me that not only had I done what I needed to do homework-wise and training-wise, but that I had included the people in my life and like shown them what I was doing, and kind of shown them why some of their worries were you know, I don't want to say unfounded, but like there are plenty of things to worry about, but you don't need to add irrelevant ones.
And it bringing somebody else along for the experience as well. Like one concept I've thought about in sport or adventure in this context is a very selfish thing. And like sort of challenging that, because that's sort of that's sort of like what people would believe probably most widely is that sport is a bit of a selfish pursuit. But then challenging that, and when you it can be, you can just like not tell anybody, you shouldn't, definitely don't, but like you can not tell anybody and run up whatever mountain or paddle whatever bay you want and not bring people along for the experience. But by including your family in the preparation for this big expedition, it benefits you because you know that they're not worried for you. It benefits them because they feel like they're sort of in it with you. So have you ever had it where somebody's like, oh, that's a very selfish thing to do. Why would you do that to your family or whatever? Do you think about it being a selfish pursuit?
Yeah, it's, I think that's your way of framing that makes a lot of sense, because there is the sense in which by definition it's selfish, right? This trip has already been done, so there's nothing of like exploratory value there. I'm not doing it for science. I'm not doing it because I have to, or at least not in a, it's not my job. And so, and then what you're left with as far as why you want to do it, a lot of those are deeply personal, and they're things that in some cases you keep to yourself, or that you just want to see, can I do this? Can I do something like this? Am I do I have what it takes to, those are totally valid reasons. And they don't benefit humanity in the big picture sense.
They can benefit your world. They might not benefit the world, but they can completely change your world.
Yeah. Now, I think there's the classic harangue of like, and you get this, women get it so much worse. Women, like mothers, there's the infamous, there are a couple situations of climbers who've died and left children. And when it's a mother who dies, it's like open season in the press. And there's an incredible book that I read getting ready for this trip called Where the Mountain Casts Its Shadow by Maria Coffey. That's about the like widows and children and widowers of climbing accidents. And it isn't, I was expecting that kind of climbing so selfish. It isn't that at all. But obviously that's a criticism. Now on the safety point of view, I won't hear that. Because nobody says you're being selfish when you drive like an idiot. Not, at least not trolls online. Whereas they do when someone comes to grief on a mountain or something like that. Sea kayaking's really safe. In fact, there was a funny moment on this trip where I was getting a ride to a meal, and this woman driving was basically like, "What you're doing is really dangerous." And I said, "Well, it's a lot safer than driving." And she's like, "What are you saying about my driving?" And I was like, "No, that wasn't personal." But I mean, I don't know what the stats are, but I mean, I don't think anyone has ever died attempting to kayak. In fact, I know no one's ever died doing this trip. During my trip, I don't know how many people died on Irish roads, but probably a lot. None of them ever get accused of. So if you take away the risk-taking side of whatever, because I don't care but as far as, I've had to be hugely selfish with my time to get this trip done. And that has meant missing one wedding that I would have rather gone to. There were a couple of weddings where I probably wish I could have avoided them, but I was during a taper or something. But stuff like that, people either get it or they don't. Most people who I'm close enough to where they would get a vote know what I'd be like and what I'd be sort of lacking as a person if I didn't have something like this in my life. And it's tough because I struggle with that too. I would love to be someone where going to a wedding makes me happy, or where my family means as much to me as the ocean does. That's not me. And I like, this sounds awful. I hope my child someday loves something as much as I love the ocean.
I don't think that's awful at all.
And I don't know. So I guess what I try to let people know when, like like Dominique's never accused me of being selfish, but I know there's plenty of times where training has come first and it's cost us time we could have spent together. And that's where, like, I generally just need her to know that I care about that question. I'm not just dismissive of it, even if what I end up choosing is to be on the water.
No, that's that's very real for me. Like, that's definitely something that I'm very aware of, but I think it's very important to be you and to be very truthful to yourself and how you want to spend your time, irrespective of other commitments in your life. And yes, in some ways, me deciding to go for a 2.5 hour run is me deciding that over some, like, dinner with family or friends or whatever the case may be. But I think it can be quite suffocating to think about it like that. What you're really actually doing is you're deciding that this thing is important to me, so I need to put time and effort into this thing.
Totally. And I guess it goes to your first question about being an outsider and what that means. And I think, like, when you look at especially solo trips, I think a lot of times it's like it's not a either or. You're not saying, like, I don't need friends. but what you're doing is like you're committing to something that has a clear like beginning and an end, where you can kind of temporarily not just do without sort of the rest of humanity. And I mean, I tend to be pretty outgoing. I love people, and I'm really talkative when I'm not out in a, I talk to myself in the boat sometimes. So that's another story. But you know, I think it's actually a lot harder to do things alone if you are like alone in the world. I think the nicer the life you have to come back to is, the easier it is to be away from it. That's been my experience on these trips. And it goes to that sense of like being supported. There's no way I could do this without the people at home. Who you know, and I think you don't have to look far in the literature of adventures and expeditions to see situations where people who maybe didn't come in from the cold didn't have that, or that, you know. But yeah, it's interesting. I saw the term sociable introverts used to describe solo sailors. There was some study around the personalities of solo adventuring, and that
sociable introverts. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. We could have stick a pin in it now, but there's one thing I want to chat about first, and it's less deep than the rest of the conversation. It's been good though. It's been very good. I think it's been very good. But any wildlife encounters?
Yeah. So
I can imagine even just around here. Like my brother was out here 2 nights ago, and he's pretty sure he saw a pod of dolphins, and he's pretty sure he saw a whale, and he's pretty sure he saw a white-tailed sea eagle. So yeah, any close encounters with?
Well, I'd say he did. I mean, in fact, right here, like right off these rocks, I had a close encounter with a minke whale when I was training.
Wow. That
was pretty special. And it was for over the course of about 20 minutes. It didn't leave. It was just sort of feeding in this one area. So I hate to say it, but and I was just this morning, I was reading a book by Ranulph Fiennes where he talks about how he's like, I don't describe scenery in my books because I'm not looking at it. And I felt very, what's the word, like vindicated or whatever by that, because I feel as though a lot of times I'm so focused on getting past a stretch of coastline that I don't get to really enjoy it. And there are places I want to come back to for that reason. But I didn't realize that springtime I was going to see way more birds. Because, I mean, everything we've talked about, this last trip I did in the off season. It was in April and May. And by July, a lot of the seabirds, especially the migratory ones, I think have moved on. So I saw puffins, shearwaters, gannets, guillemots, every seabird. That was cool. They're kind of always with me. And you can see why sailors saw them as like companions. On day 2, I was crossing Liscannor Bay, which is off La Hinch. Wild place because you have Spanish Point on one side, you have the Cliffs of Moher on the other side. And I was just moving as fast as I could. And because there was a strong offshore wind, so there were the pretty nasty little white caps kind of slapping me around. And I saw a big fin. And, you know, it's early in the morning. It's my second day on the trip. I'm really nervous. And it's going side to side, the tail fin. So I'm like, okay, that's a shark. That's not a whale. And my first thought wasn't basking shark. I was kind of like, that's a just big shark.
It's 2 sharks.
Yeah. And luckily it was a basking shark. And I saw a lot of those because generally they seem to like, I mean, they bask, I guess it's in the name. They like that really nice weather. And so when it was very sunny and calm that first week up in Connemara, there were tons of them. A lot of dolphins, a lot of seals, obviously. I don't think I saw any whales this trip. But I mean, yeah, plenty of sea life.
Amazing.
I got bumped a couple of times, and where something something touched the bottom of a boat.
It's kind of like going for a, who knows what that could have been. We could start a whole conspiracy theory about what that was, but it's kind of like going for a sea swim and your foot touches some seaweed, and in your mind it's the worst thing ever.
What's the line from Spinal Tap? Like, some things are best left uninvestigated. Like, no, I moments like that, I really tried to just keep a lid on it and like, who cares what that was? Like, yeah, no, totally. That, and sea swimming for that reason, I think, is a great training for a trip like this, because you do get the exercise, it loads your shoulders and all that, but more than that, you get really comfortable in what can be a pretty spooky environment.
Yeah, like sort of, again, developing a little bit of a relationship maybe with the water, and getting, there's no more intimate connection with the water than getting in it, I suppose. But awesome. Yeah, thanks I think we'll wrap it up there. I think
Brilliant.
That was,
Thanks for having me. I hope I didn't bring things down too much.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think it's important to have a balance in these things, and that was brilliant chat. Thanks very much for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Charlie Daly. I think it was a really honest and open conversation, and I hope you were able to take something from it. After a brief hiatus from the podcast for the past couple of weeks, we've got some really fun guests lined up over the next couple of months. So stay tuned and subscribe wherever you get this podcast, and feel free to share it with a friend that you think might enjoy it as well. But thanks very much, and we will talk to you very soon.